In this first slideshow, I'm just going to take you through some of the features of a perfectly competitive market, and then we're going to look at some of the other market structures. So it's going to be vitally important that you understand how these different structures work when you do your assignment later on. So some of the features, of our perfectly competitive market. First of all, as you can see with the lots of Pokemon, the first characteristic of a purely competitive market is that there is strong competition and lots of different suppliers in the market. So that is what is represented by this picture. The second one, you may be able to guess, it's ease of entry and exit. It is easy for new firms in a perfectly competitive market to start work in that market if they want to start up business. So there are no setup costs or high setup costs in an industry that will prevent them from starting in that market. That might be the case for someone that wants to sell in their own fruit market or any market where there is very low barriers to entry. So the second characteristic is low barriers to entry and exit. The third one is homogeneous goods. In a purely competitive market, goods are exactly the same. And this means that purely competitive markets are more competitive because if we're selling exactly the same product, we are only competing on price. And the thing with that is that if we're only competing on price, there is demands on producers to be as efficient as they possibly can, because if they're not efficient, then other businesses will just undercut their prices and they will go out of business. So in a purely competitive market, we have homogeneous goods. The next characteristic, what does this mean? Alright, the next characteristic is that in a perfectly competitive market, there will be what we call symmetric information or perfect information. And what that means is that buyers and sellers know everything about the products and they know everything about the prices that other businesses are charging. So, for example, when you buy something on eBay, you may not know some of the characteristics of the product that you're buying. So we would say that has asymmetric information. The buyer in this circumstance does not have complete information about that product and therefore cannot make a rational decision. But in a perfectly competitive market, we assume buyers and sellers have all available information about all products in the market. This next one is in a pure competition, there is an even distribution of income within that market. So no one supplier is going to take the whole economic pie. There will be shared within the industry. This picture, and I don't know, Pinky in the Brain may have been a little bit before your time, but this is just saying that in a purely competitive market, one supplier can't take over the whole market. So you can't take over the whole world, or you don't have the ability to monopolize or be the sole producer in that market. So in this example, is this product homogeneous? Is this product an example of a perfectly competitive market? No. Even though these products, and in this case it's laundry detergent, are very similar, they are distinguishable by brand, they are distinguishable because they're slightly different products, and therefore they're not a perfectly competitive market. And what that means is that these brands don't have to charge the same prices. Because they have been distinguished based on brand, based on packaging, they no longer are purely competitive. So, our characteristics of a perfect competition we'll go through from the start. There are many buyers and sellers who are price takers, and what that means is that no individual buyer or seller is able to influence the price in that market. They are determinant based on what other people are selling, what the price other people are selling at. Homogeneous goods, so goods are exactly the same. There are no brand names, there are no advertising in a perfectly competitive market. As I said before, there's ease of entry and exit into a market. So most perfectly competitive markets will have low setup costs. So it doesn't cost you a lot to start up business in that market, and therefore anybody can start up if they want to join that market and they have the necessary skills. The next one is there's perfect information. So every consumer and producer knows everything about the products that are on offer. And the last two, there's strong competition in a perfectly competitive market, and there are no government restrictions. In real life, no markets are purely competitive. All markets will have some distinguishable features that we will talk about when we look at monopolistic competition. So some examples of markets that are close to perfect competition: the fruit market, okay, a bunch of sellers saying a very homogeneous or identical product in a small space. Another example would be bookmakers or betting companies, because if you're looking to bet for a different company, all that is distinguishing their products is the price that they're charging. That is the only distinguishable feature in a betting market. Now, what actually happens why they're not perfectly competitive is that they can also be distinguished based on brands. But generally, the only thing people care about when they're deciding on to bet on a horse is the price. So it's very close to a perfectly competitive market. Agricultural markets are another example because they're selling homogeneous products. So the second type of market structure, monopolistic competition. The only difference between perfect market and monopolistic competition is that the products aren't perfectly homogeneous. They're not exactly the same. All other characteristics are very similar. There are a large number of buyers and sellers. There are ease of entry and exit into the industry. There is the products are essentially very similar. However, they can be distinguishable. And in a monopolistic competition, producers have some say over the price they charge. Because they are providing a slightly differentiated product, they are not complete price takers. So, for example, monopolistic competition may include restaurants, may include painters, plumbers, toothbrushes would be an example of monopolistic competition, restaurants. These businesses are selling similar but not identical products. The next market structure are oligopolies and duopolies. Oligopolies are business firms that have a small number of producers that dominate the market. Okay, so that may include Coles and Woolworths, which are a duopoly because there's only two of them. The airline companies in Australia, Visy and Amcor, which are cardboard manufacturers, are another example of an oligopoly because they are two major firms are dominating the market share. The classic example of an oligopoly would be Coke and Pepsi because there are two main firms that are dominating the market in that industry and they've now formed a duopoly. So some features of an oligopoly, they're what we call highly concentrated. Now what that means is that there are only a few major suppliers. Sometimes they sell homogeneous products, so they sell identical products. An example of that would be in the oil market. There are large providers of oil, petrol companies, that are selling a very similar product. What oligopolies don't like to do is they don't like to lower their prices. So businesses will try and compete in other ways, and that includes advertising, innovation, branding, as some of your examples. The last thing is oligopolies are price makers, and what that means is they have power to charge higher prices to make higher profits, and therefore they can make abnormal profits and higher profits than monopolistic competition or perfect markets. This last bit where he talks about the higher barriers to entry is what we're going to talk about in the next slideshow. Monopolies are the last form of market structure, and that means that there is only one seller in the industry. There are no close substitutes to what they're providing. A monopolist can make abnormal profits because they're not competing with anybody else. But they also have the opportunity to be highly inefficient because they don't need to be as productive because they're not competing with other industries. Businesses in monopolies, will make abnormal profits. They can make very large profits because they're the only seller in that industry. And we'll talk about some of the high barriers to entry again in the next slideshow. This is the last thing you need to be aware of for the quiz that I'm about to give you. Monopolies versus monopsony power. Monopolist is when there's one main seller in an industry. Monopsony power is when there is one single buyer in an industry. So a good example of a monopsony is when a farmer is only selling to Coles. They're the only buyer in that industry. And what happens with monopsony power is that the buyer actually has all the power because the seller relies on them to buy their product. So if they don't buy their product, they can go out of business. And that gives the buyer the opportunity to exert their market power over the seller, which is very different to monopoly power. So what I'm going to get you to do now is have a go at the quiz looking at these key concepts. Thank you.